Hello, I'm going to read the chapter 5 of Michel De Certeau's book, The Practice of Everyday Life. The name of the chapter, The Arts of Theory. Let us begin. A particular problem arises when, instead of being a discourse on other discourses, as is usually the case, theory has to advance over an area where there are no longer any discourses. There is a sudden unevenness of terrain. The ground on which verbal language rests begins to fail. The theorizing operations finds itself at the limits of the terrain, where it normally functions like an automobile at the edge of a cliff. Beyond and below lies the ocean. So he is saying that all the purpose of all discourse, especially the discourse of modern times, is that the discourses are mainly the discourse on other discourses. And in case of the Foucault and Bourdieu, which we will say later, that they try to make discourses on non-discursive practices. But what happens when someone want to create a discourse, but not on anything, not on other discourses? As he is saying here, instead of being a discourse on other discourses, what is usually the case? He's saying that what is usually the case is that discourse is always on negating or in perpetuating other discourse, etc. But what happens if a theory has to advance over an area where there are no longer any discourses? What happens if, just as Michel De Certeau will say this, what he is trying to do, it is the practice of everyday life, that De Certeau is giving a discourse, you want to advance a theory when there are no longer discourses. Then what happens that the verbal language begins to fail. It's like he has given a beautiful metaphor. Automobile at the edge of a cliff, beyond and below lies the ocean. Let us continue. Foucault and Bourdieu situate their enterprise on this edge by articulating a discourse on non-discursive practices. They are not the first to do so. So what they say that the Foucault and Bourdieu had situated their enterprise by doing what? That they had articulated a discourse on non-discursive practices. They have made a discourse of non-discursive practices. In Bourdieu's case, most importantly, the idea of habitus. That is this learned ignorance, Dr. Ignorantia. So then, what he's saying is they are not the first one to do this. Without going back to ancient times, we can say that since Immanuel Kant, every theoretical effort has had to give a more or less direct explanation of its relationship to this non-discursive activity, to this immense remainder constituted by the part of human experience that has not been tamed and symbolized in language. An individual science can avoid this direct confrontation. It grants itself a priori, the condition that allows it to encounter things only in its own limited field where it can verbalize them. So saying that in case of science, what happens that it grants itself, or in case of individual science, they grant themselves a priori, something that is truth beforehand, something that cannot be questioned, a priori. You know that wherever we start to do any philosophical discourse or want to create any discourse, you have to take something as a priori. There's something that you must stick on, otherwise you cannot move around. It grants itself a priori, the conditions that allow it to encounter things only in its limited field where it can verbalize them. So science is of course a limited field because whenever it is giving itself a priori, so it must be in that field. It lies in wait for them in the grid work of models and hypotheses where it can make them talk, and this interrogatory apparatus, like a hunter's trap, transforms their wordless silence into answers and hence into language. This is called experimentation. You know that how scientific inquiries or scientific researches are done. He's telling about this. Theoretical questioning, you know that in case of science, we have hypothesis. We have a priori, we have hypotheses, then the but then the components in the research they will talk, and that will be the answer, etc. But he's differentiating it with the theoretical questioning. In case of philosophy, the theoretical questioning on the contrary cannot forget that in addition to the relationship of these scientific discourses to one another, there is also their common relation with what they have taken care to exclude from their field in order to constitute it. So, philosophical questions or theoretical questions, what is the problem in them, that they cannot forget that the connections that they are making between things, that the things that they are including, that's all right, but the things that they are excluding from their research, from their constitution, these things also have relationships with the things that they have included. That's very important. Theoretical questioning, on the contrary, cannot forget that in addition to the relationship of the scientific discourses to one another, there is also their common relations with what they have taken care to exclude from their field in order to constitute it. It is linked to the pullulation of that which does not speak or does not yet speak, and which takes the shape, among others, of ordinary practices. It is the memory of this remainder. So he is saying that in philosophical cases, what he says, that it is linked to the pullulation of that which does not speak and which takes the shape, among others, of ordinary practices. So that does not speak, they become ordinary practices. It is the memory of this remainder. It is the antigone of what is not acceptable within the scientific jurisdictions. It constantly brings this unforgettable element back into the scientific places where technical constraints make it politically, methodologically, and in theory provisionally necessary to forget it. So remember this line, it is the memory of this remainder. In case of what happens in philosophical inquiry, the ordinary practices becomes ordinary practice is the memory of this remainder. It's a very good metaphor he has used, antigone of what is not acceptable within the scientific jurisdiction. It constantly brings this unforgettable element back into the scientific places where technical constraints make it politically necessary to forget it. How does it succeed in doing this? By what brilliant strokes or through what rules? That is the question. So he's looking at how scientific discourses been able so perfectly, how scientific discourses become able to forget these unforgettable elements. So these unforgettable elements, they're necessary to forget. It is necessary to forget it, because if you do not forget them, if you just stop thinking about it, then you just cannot do it. So it's saying that how these forgettable elements, which are necessary to be forgotten, how do they do this? How do they forget these unforgettable elements? What brilliant strokes are there? Cut out and turn over a recipe for theory. We must return to the works of Foucault and Bourdieu. Although they are both important, there is an obvious difference between them, and that in itself a reason for paying attention to them on the threshold of an essay that doesn't claim to be a history of theories concerning practices. These two monuments situate a field of research standing almost at its two poles. Nevertheless, however distant they may be from each other, the two bodies of work seem to be constructed by means of the same procedures. So he's saying that so what he's saying that Foucault and Bourdieu, both of these philosophers, he says that their works are poles apart, but both of them are important. He's saying these two monuments situate a field of research standing almost at its two poles. Nevertheless, however distant they may be from each other, the two bodies of work seem to be constructed by means of the same procedures. What are these procedures? The same operational schema can be observed in both. in spite of the difference in the materials used. So there is a common schema, the different materials, the problematics involved, and the perspectives opened up. So what is the schema? The problematics. Okay, no, sorry. In spite of the differences in the materials used, the problematics involved, and the perspectives opened up. We seem to have here two variants of a way of making the theory of practices like a way of cooking. This is very important. He's saying that we seem to have here two variants of a way of making. Two ways of making. So if one of Foucault and one of Bourdieu, the theory of practices like a way of cooking. This way can be exercised in different circumstances. So he is saying that this way that Foucault and Bourdieu had given it a different schema, the same schema, the different materials and problematics involved, as perspectives opened up, etc. is what have they done. So they have done it in the two variants in the way of making the theory of practices. They're saying that there can be different ways of doing this. This way, like a way of cooking, cooking can be done in hundreds of ways. This way can be exercised in different circumstances and with heterogeneous interest. It has its tricks of the trade and its good or bad players. So, like a way of cooking, this way can be exercised in different circumstances and with heterogeneous interests, various interests. It has its tricks of the trade and its good or bad players. It also allows one to score points. Using the imperatives that punctuate the steps in a recipe, we could say that this theorizing operations consists of two moments. First, cut out, then turnover. First, an ethnological isolation, then a logical inversion. So that's what we are going to see in this theory of Certeau himself. That the Certeau would be these two ways. So using the imperatives that punctuate the steps in a recipe, we could say that this theorizing operation consists of two moments, cut out and turnover. First an ethnological isolation, then a logical inversion.